Hi class, this is Professor Adamson. I have done so many takes of this, I just have to get this over with. This is going to be the first of 4 quick videos that I upload this week. This class is ending this week, so I've got to get this done either today or tomorrow, but we're going to have the final this week. It's going to get put onto Blackboard on Tuesday and will be due to my email on Thursday. But let's not talk about that right now. We've got to jump right into anatomy and physiology. I am going to hold up a quick diagram that I made. And in the other takes that I've done other notes down here. But for now, I'll just focus on this part, okay? So before we get talking about the auditory system in earnest, I want you guys to just understand that we can organize the auditory system among any number of different designations or sort of organizational terms, okay? At the most basic level, you can split the auditory system into 2 parts, the peripheral system and the central system, okay? Peripheral, meaning anything that you have 2 of, okay? I've got 2 of these, right? 2 ear canals, 2 eardrums, 2 sets of bones behind, etc., etc. That makes it peripheral, and peripheral meaning on the periphery, on the side. It's sort of easy to figure out from there. Central, on the other hand, is the brainstem and brain. Now, cranial nerve number 8, which is right here, which is the vestibulocochlear nerve, that's a mouthful. That's one of 12 cranial nerves, but that particular cranial nerve is responsible for giving us the sensations of balance, perceptions of proprioception and balance, and also hearing, okay? So vestibulocochlear, balance, vestibular, cochlear, hearing, okay? Now, I did just say that cranial nerve number 8 is part of the central auditory system, but some of you will wisely note that we do indeed have 2 cranial nerve number 8s, one that's connecting from the cochlea on the right side to the brain and also on the left side. So you could make an argument, I suppose, rhetorically, that cranial nerve number 8 is part of the peripheral auditory system, but physiologically, what's happening here is more similar to the central auditory system. So in general, we would call cranial nerve number 8 part of the central system. After that, we break it down into designations that you're probably a little bit more familiar with. In 8th grade biology, you probably learned about outer, middle, and inner ear, right? And cranial nerve number 8 and brainstem and brain are what we call retrocochlear. They're beyond that. But let's talk about outer, middle, and inner ear for a second. Outer ear is comprised of this, which is the pinna. It's oftentimes referred to as the auricle, A-U-R-I-C-L-E, not oracle like O-R-A-C-L-E, auricle. Just call it the pinna. Now, don't call it the ear lobe, however. The ear lobe or the lobule is really just this soft, fleshy part of the pinna. Lay people will call this whole thing the earlobe, which is fine, but we're not lay people anymore. So the pinna. The next part of the auditory system, the next part of the outer ear after the pinna is the external auditory meatus. Sorry, I've written these down on other takes and I'll just put it back up as opposed to rewriting it. External auditory meatus. That's just a long kind of $6 word for ear canal, okay? Or you can just say the EAM. Meatus is any sort of opening or kind of opening to some part of the body. So that's where you get the word meatus from, hole, essentially, okay? External auditory meatus. That's the outer ear, that's it. Now, from the outer ear, we then move into the middle ear. The middle ear is comprised of the eardrum, sometimes called the tympanic membrane, the TM, and then the 3 ossicles, or bones, that are behind the eardrum, and we have 2 sets of them, right? 2 mallei, I guess, 2 sets of incuses and 2 stapes, okay? The ossicles themselves are held in place by ligaments in the middle ear space. They connect to the eardrum and then connect to the bony wall of the cochlea in the inner ear. Sorry, I've got a dog that's, I think, trying to get in at any rate. The middle ear space is that. It's a space. It's a space filled with air on the inside of your body, okay? And it needs to be air. For this process to work, we have to have the medium of air right there, which we'll get into in a second. The tough thing about the middle ear space is that it's mucosal, like the linings of it. It's a space of air. It's not very big space, but its walls are comprised of wet tissue. Mucosa, like this lining here. You guys know what mucosa is. It's a wet-walled space of air that doesn't have regular access to the outside world. And what do we know about wet things that don't get oxygen, that don't get regular pressure equalization and so forth? It's kind of a lab for pathology. Anybody who's ever left maybe a dirty towel on the floor and then picked it up after a day or two, a wet dirty towel, and it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? Exact same thing in the middle ear space. If we aren't getting regular oxygen to that mucosa, anything that's sloughing off from there, it can become infected. Okay, and we're going to talk more about that later. One of you is doing a presentation on otitis media, and that will become evident with that. Also in the middle ear space is the eustachian tube, which is what equalizes the pressure from the wet space of air behind the eardrum to your nasopharynx, which is you guys know what the nasopharynx is. But that's what allows for the equalization of pressure from the outside world to the middle ear space. Now, our ears haven't really adapted or evolved to take into account rapid changes in altitude, for example, right? Ancient man, when we were evolving from primates, our ears developed as they are, knowing that people more or less stayed at the same, sea level. People lived in the mountains, people lived at near sea level, wherever. They lived wherever, but people were not regularly going up and down in elevators or regularly going up and down in airplanes. So it's sort of an evolutionary flaw that our technology has advanced further than our ability to evolve past it. It's one of the reasons why, getting on an airplane can be very unpleasant for babies, because not only can they not, kind of force open or like yawn and, chew gum or whatever you need to do to equalize the pressure, the baby's eustachian tubes are very horizontal at that point. As we get older and our skulls get bigger, they become a little bit more of an angle so that things can kind of drain through gravity. But when they're like this, there's just not a whole lot, there's just not much place for that to go. Okay, I need to keep moving. We're already at 7 minutes here. From there, we go into the inner ear. The inner ear is the cochlea. The cochlea is the organ of hearing. If you ever get asked, what is the organ of hearing? I sometimes have some smart aleck students that'll say the ear or the brain, and neither of those is really wrong, but technically it's the cochlea. The cochlea is sort of the analog to the retina in the eye, okay? So if somebody says, what is the actual organ of vision? It's the retina with its rods and cones, right? For the ear, it's the cochlea. The cochlea has 2.5 turns of flesh and blood encased in bone. Okay, it's very important that you understand that the cochlea itself is encased inside this, the mastoid bone, the thickest part of your skull. It covers up, it protects the cochlea, but it covers up sort of the temporal bone, the temporal lobe, I should say, of your brain. It's also called, this whole thing is the temporal bone, but this specific spot right here, the mastoid, that's where the cochlea is. It's in there. You'd have to drill in to get it, but nevertheless, it's in bone. The cochlea is not a distinct organ that you, like your heart, can go in and sever the connections and pull up and hold up. You'll never be able to do a cochlear transplant, for example, because it's not a distinct organ. It's bony tubes of fluid inside a bone. Okay, the cochlea, 2.5 turns of frequency-specific hair cells that are coded to pick up frequencies from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. The cochlea is tonotopic, Tonotopic, meaning that there is a space along those 2.5 turns that corresponds with each of those frequencies, 20 hertz, 21 hertz, 22 hertz, 23 hertz, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The cochlea, when you flip it on its side, it sort of looks a little bit like a soft serve ice cream cone, base to apex. Normally in pictures we see it kind of looking like that, like a Cinnabon or like Princess Leia's hair or something like that, right? But when you flip it on its side, high frequencies are coded at the base going to low frequencies at the apex, okay? Tonotopic. We go from base, the highest frequencies, 20,000 hertz, up the 2.5 turns to the apex where we have the lowest frequencies, okay? Also within the inner ear are 5 organs we just don't have time to talk about, but it's the 5 organs of balance. And you guys have seen these in pictures, I'm sure, but it's the semicircular canals. I'm going to hold up a picture from the textbook. This is page 34. But right here, this is all inner ear right here. Everything that's sort of in this purplish color, okay? Cochlea right here. Semicircular canals right there. We have 3 different canals that help us with balance and proprioception in sort of 3 different dimensions. This way, and this way, okay? We move our heads in any of those 3 directions, and our organs of balance are sort of constantly compensating and always allowing for us to kind of know where we are and keep our wits about us and keep our balance, okay? The utricle and saccule are located between the 3 semicircular canals and the cochlea, and they are responsible for having proprioception and balance when we're moving in space. So as we go forward or as we go to the side, we can always keep our balance and our wits about us, okay? So that's really it for anatomy of outer, middle, and inner. Now from there we go to, as I said, cranial nerve number 8, and then to the brainstem and brain. We do not have time to talk much about the central auditory system, but suffice it to say, just like there are parts of the cochlea that are tonotopically coded, likewise within your auditory cortex on your brain, and you have 2 of them, you have going from low frequency to high frequency. And the auditory cortex is in the temporal lobe, but you sort of have to bend. The temporal lobe is kind of that thumb of the brain. If you look at a brain, it kind of looks like a thumb. That's the temporal lobe. If you pull that back, bend it down, that's where the auditory cortex is. From there, yeah, so that's it talking about that. Now, we need to jump down to the other organizational terms that I have for here. You can see that I did my best to try to line them up, but we can also think about the peripheral auditory system having an aspect of it that is conductive in nature, and then part of the peripheral auditory system, and then all of the central auditory system is sensorineural in nature, okay? Now, this is a little hard to describe in this short amount of time that we have, but you can think of the conductive hearing mechanism as anything that just moves sound through. It's like the conductor on a train. Sound wave energy is just kind of going through it, right? It's being conducted through. Sensorineural, on the other hand, something's being done to that information. I tell this to the undergraduate students, but you can think of this as sort of being like the analog part of the ear, kind of the mechanical part of the ear, and this is being sort of the digital part of the ear, the kind of computer part of the ear. This is sort of, I guess, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, you can fix conductive hearing issues surgically or medically or through treatment, through medicine. Sensorineural issues, though, are issues that can only be rehabilitated. In other words, once there's damage to the cochlea, cranial nerve number 8, or the brainstem or brain, it's gone. We have to just rehabilitate at that point, either through hearing aids or cochlear implants. We can't medically fix damage to the sensory neural mechanisms, okay? Furthermore, sensory and neural are kind of the things that come from sensory neural. Sensory, meaning the cochlea part of it, sorry, I lost my train of thought, and then neural, meaning cranial nerve number 8 and brain. This is easy to remember because, as I said, the organ of hearing is the cochlea. So the sensory part, cochlea, inner ear, neural, meaning stuff that's made up of neurons, right? You guys know this, but nerves and the white and gray matter of the brain are comprised of neurons with long axons. And anyway, we don't need to get into that, but neural is cranial nerve number 8, brainstem and brain, okay? When we are discussing hearing loss, and we're going to talk about this in the next lecture, I'm already at 15 minutes, I got to go fast. Conductive hearing losses are hearing losses associated with damage to the outer and middle ear. Sensorineural hearing losses are hearing losses associated with the inner ear, cranial nerve number 8, brainstem and brain, okay? Last but not least, you can think of this entire thing that we've talked about happening in terms of what's going on physically, or with sort of, I guess, acoustics, for lack of a better word. Sound wave energy entering the pinna and going down the length of the external auditory meatus. At that point, that energy is acoustic in nature. As soon as the eardrum gets set into motion from the air molecules that are hitting it at certain frequencies and certain amplitudes, the energy transduces. Transduction just means how energy changes from one form to another, okay? But sound wave energy transduces from acoustic to mechanic at the eardrum, okay? It's mechanical, but I'm just trying to keep it in the same sort of figure of speech, part of speech. Acoustic energy becomes mechanical energy at the eardrum. The three bones vibrate after the eardrum vibrates. The stapes foot plate that's sitting right there into the bone, the bony wall of the cochlea, starts to set into motion the fluids of the cochlea, at which point the energy transduces into hydraulic, okay? The fluids of the cochlea set the membranes within the cochlea, as I said, along those 2.5 turns into motion at certain places and tonotopically read, where those membranes run into another membrane. I don't have time to give you the details, but cause the tips of the hair cells to shear, and fire, and action potential is realized, and the energy becomes electric at that point, okay? So we have acoustic going to mechanical, going to hydraulic, going to electric, okay? Energy transduces 3 times by the time it reaches our brain. And that's remarkable. There isn't, the more and more I think about this stuff with the human, with the auditory system, the more remarkable it is, and I've been doing this for a long time. At any rate, that's all the time I have. I'm sorry that I went over the time. I've already done like 4 takes of this, so I can't do another one, so I'm gonna leave it at that. Just email me, as always, with questions. Thank you.